The UK Parliament and Charles brought Has to court. The UK Parliament brought Prince Harry to court for using his Royal Highness titles for Archie and Lilibet without permission. Hello and welcome to Royal Insider. If it is your first time here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on all our royal updates. The Prince was first notified of the charge in a letter from the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, which stated that the Prince had used the titles without the permission of the Crown. The Prince responded to the letter by stating that he had been using the titles for many years and that he had no intention of stopping. The Prince's defense team argued that the titles had been granted to the Prince by his father, Prince Charles, and that the Prince had the right to use them. However, the prosecution argued that the Prince had not been granted the titles by his father and that he should therefore not be allowed to use them. It is not said whether or not Prince Harry will keep calling his children or addressing them in public with the title. The Prince's use of his Royal Highness titles has come under scrutiny in recent years, with several media outlets reporting on the Prince's use of the titles. The Prince has been criticized for using the titles to promote his business ventures, and some have argued that the titles should be stripped from the Prince and given to his younger brother, Prince William. The Prince's use of the titles has been controversial, and his prosecution by the UK Parliament is likely to further fuel the debate. The Prince's defense team will likely argue that the Prince has the right to use the titles, and the prosecution will likely argue that the Prince should not be allowed to use the titles because he has not been granted them by his father. The Prince's next court appearance is likely to be a key moment in the debate over the Prince's use of his Royal Highness titles. The crisis of 1629–60 was caused by Charles I's belief that he could govern without the advice and consent of Parliament. This was matched by Parliament's insistence that it had a role to play in government, particularly in the granting of tax income to the Crown and in dealing with the grievances of those ruled by the King. According to documents uncovered by The Guardian, Prince Charles used a controversial procedure to force government ministers to change a proposed law to benefit his estate. The National Archives show that ministers in John Major's government relented to his demands in order to avoid a constitutional crisis. The Prince was able to force the hand of the elected government because ministers backed down to avoid a row. The documents show how the royal family has used the secretive procedure known as Queen's consent to alter legislation to benefit their private interests. Under the procedure, the monarch and her eldest son are given copies of draft laws in advance so that they can examine whether the legislation affects their public powers or private assets. The Duchy said in a statement that neither it nor the Prince had any involvement in the drafting of legislation relating to any part of leasehold reform, including the question of tenants buying their own homes.